Right, let's get on to some international issues with a lot of play with ministers in the United States. China says they've now suspended Hong Kong's extradition treaties with Australia, Canada and the United Kingdom. And this announcement came as Foreign Minister Marise Payne and Defence Minister Linda Reynolds held the AUSMIN talks with their US counterparts, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Defence Secretary Mike Esper in Washington. To discuss this and more, the Australian's Foreign Affairs Editor, Greg Sheridan, who's joining me now from Melbourne. Greg, let's start with the national security talks in Washington. Following the meetings, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has had this to say.
This isn't about picking America versus China. This is about choosing freedom and democracy against tyranny and authoritarian regime.
Now, that's not an unexpected statement, Greg. How did you see the commentary play out?
Look, Peter, I think it was very well handled by the Morrison government. I think there's been a very effective AUSMIN. It's not historic or, direction altering. It's not anything like what they boomed the meeting in advance. But dear God in heaven, to see Marise Payne and Linda Reynolds over-boom something is wonderful. Hallelujah! They might get the bug of politics next. That's fantastic. But it was a very good meeting. We got the Americans to do a few concrete things. They're going to establish a strategic fuel reserve in Darwin. We're going to have even more exercises together in the South China Sea. We're going to involve more third countries in our joint training in Northern Australia and so on. Now, none of that's revolutionary, but it's all very good. The other thing is, we agree with the substance of their position on China, but they are going into a period of somewhat turbocharged language because of the US presidential election. Therefore, it was very good for Payne and Reynolds to say, yes, we agree mostly with the Americans, but we're not going to use that language very explicitly. We don't use that language. We have a slightly different relationship with China. I think that's quite good. So we want to be with the Americans on substance. We don't want to necessarily engage in Donald Trump's rhetoric, which might only be extant for the purposes of the election. Even if Trump himself is re-elected, he might have a completely different rhetorical register after the election. So I think the Morrison government has had good message discipline here. They've stuck to the script very well. They've got good outcomes from this. And, politically, it's been very satisfactory.
Yeah, I was interested in your take out there, so close to the US election in November, whether or not it would be seen, well, it certainly was over there, whether it would be seen through here or the prism of all the posturing that we might expect from the administration. Both these ministers, I remember AUSMIN in the days of Robert Hill and Alexander Downer all those years ago when I worked for the Defence Minister. Far more colourful ministers than these two. I don't think anyone could argue that they would overcook it. And I think that's been, as you say, very steady. I want to ask you about freedom of navigation exercises. Two things here. Should we be involved? And I'm also conscious we use this phrase all the time. Most people at home would not have any idea what we're talking about in practical terms. What are they and should we be there?
I'll give you the real super shorthand description because I've got a column tomorrow saying how AUSMIN is like a meeting of the College of the Catholic Cardinals. The language is theological. You need a smoke signal to interpret what's really happened. Freedom of navigation exercises mean sailing within 12 nautical miles of a territory claimed by another nation where you don't recognise the claim. Now, China has occupied a lot of pre-existing islands in the South China Sea to which it has no legitimate claim at all. But probably even if we did a freedom of navigation exercise, we wouldn't sail within 12 nautical miles of them because they must belong to somebody, either Vietnam or Malaysia or somebody. So sailing within that zone would contravene their territorial rights. The Americans say they have the right of free passage anywhere, so they're happy to do that. Where we would sail, though, is China has also built a lot of artificial islands in the South China Sea, and it's absolutely clear in international law that an artificial structure cannot generate territorial rights. So we would probably sail within 12 nautical miles of an artificial island. We haven't done it so far because, frankly speaking, we're scared of Chinese retaliation. I don't think that's cowardly on our part because no one else in the region has done it either except the Americans. The Chinese are not going to retaliate against the Americans because, even the Chinese would not be foolish enough to fire on an American warship. That would be suicidal. They probably wouldn't fire on an Australian warship, but you can't be sure. The Japanese haven't done it, the Indians haven't done it, the Singaporeans haven't done it, and it would be a bit, courageous in the Sir Humphrey style for us to be the only nation that does it. But at the same time, we don't say we're never going to do it, because that would be to concede the principle to the Chinese. So I think our position here is quite reasonable. And even if you think we should do a freedom of navigation exercise, I don't think we should do one 90 days before a US presidential election, because that would look as though you were jumping into bed with Donald Trump's re-election gambit. And, even if you love Trump, quite properly, the Australian relationship is not partisan. It's a bipartisan thing. We don't want it to get, messed up in American electoral politics.
Separate things out. I've got to ask you, yes, you're based in Victoria, but you've also written a lengthy analysis piece in the Oz today looking at the position of Australia in this COVID pandemic vis-a-vis a whole lot of other countries, and the rise of commentary from some that this is not much more than a bad dose of the flu. What's your assessment on two things? Where we sit internationally, and you used a lot of statistics I was a bit interested in today, Greg, but also how the Victorian government, looking at where their other state counterparts are, how they've handled things here.
Well, look, some of my friends, Peter, take the view that this is not much worse than the flu, and I think they're just crackers. I think that is a ridiculous view. This is a global pandemic with at least 700,000 odd dead now, but we know that in countries like Indonesia and India, death rates are massively underreported because they have such little testing capacity. So it's already killed probably a lot over 1 million people. It's accelerating. We had 1 million new cases in 4 days. Its spread is accelerating all over the world. The countries which think they've beaten it, like Hong Kong and Spain and Florida and Texas and so on, are in the grip of a terrible second wave. Boris Johnson is seeing a second wave happening in Europe, so he's imposed a 14-day quarantine for any traveller from Spain. This is a massive health crisis which is going to kill a lot of people, and a lot of people who get sick with it, even if they recover, they have permanent lung damage or kidney damage or heart damage. So I think not taking it seriously is just crackers. And of course, it's also false to say you could save the economy but let the virus run free, because if the virus runs free, it infects so many people that you completely overwhelm your health system. And then everybody is just screaming out for the government to protect their lives. How are we doing internationally? Even with this Victorian outbreak, we are doing well, but we are on the cusp of a terrible situation. A lot of people have died needlessly in aged care homes. In Australia, I think that's shocking, because if there's anything we knew in advance, it was that the most vulnerable people are in aged care. So how did we not have the PPE equipment? How did we not have the workers working in multiple sites? Or how did we not have all that sorted out? We're spending tens and hundreds of billions of dollars to keep the economy going. We couldn't spend a few extra $1 million to ensure the aged care homes were as safe as possible. I think overall, Daniel Andrews is a fantastically effective politician. He's a brilliant election winner, and he presents very well. And his language and most of his policies are not extreme. I don't think he's a crypto-communist or something. But the performance of the Andrews government in this virus has been utterly shocking. The basic failure to run the quarantine hotels properly, that is the worst government failure in Australia possibly since World War II. And also, they have been slack in the way they've done contact tracing until very recently. Now, everybody in the Victorian level is working absolutely flat out, no question about that. And the people in the health system are fantastic heroes, God bless them. But this has been a very poor performance. If the Andrews government is not turned out at the next election, that shows that state politics just doesn't work. It's not a democracy anymore. There's no accountability.
Yeah, or it shows that Victorians are mad anyway.